Welcome to our third and final episode talking about dealing with trauma, loss and grief in a crisis situation, and specifically as it relates to the bushfire catastrophe that we are currently experiencing here in Australia, with our superstar social worker Liz Crowe. In this episode, Liz speaks to us about the weeks and months after the firestorm has passed. What happens once the crisis has abated and the world has stopped talking about it, but the victims and those who went to help them are left to pick up the pieces and deal with what they had experienced. The advice from this episode also goes way beyond this particular situation. Liz gives some invaluable input into burnout and compassion fatigue in everyday life and how to deal with it. Have a listen to the previous two episodes if you want to hear more about what Liz had to say, and don't forget to share this with anyone who you think might benefit from having a listen. Enjoy.
You were talking before about the acute, acute critical stress phase. So that's when it's still occurring and still in it. But then you said that the post-traumatic stress phase of what happens is, how long is that? That could be years later. It could be, so the acute stage is currently now, and and then 2 months, 3 months after, or is it really defined like that, or not really?
So look, I'm not an expert in this field, so I'm not claiming to be, but my understanding is, so, we have seen an event at work and it's very confronting and the event has stopped and then people have a phase of acute critical stress disorder that could go on for, a day or several days or a couple of weeks, and usually it reduces as you get further away from it.
Yeah.
If it doesn't reduce and people still become symptomatic, and then they also, they're hyper aroused by noises and screams and sounds and smells, then that can go on and PTSD can continue for a long time. Yeah. Not my field of expertise, but these guys are still in the crisis. So they can't even stop the acute critical stress symptoms because it's still going. And so their brain is in this constant fight or freeze response, and will have to stay there potentially for a period of time yet. And then we have to see. Certainly Charles Figley did a lot of research on victims, like the soldiers from the war coming from Afghanistan, because, we can look at things retrospectively with the Vietnam vets, but Afghanistan has been a current thing. Yeah. And what they've shown is, regardless of the event, there are 5 to 10 to 15%, some of them say, some go as high as 20, but most of them are around 5 to 15% on either extremes. So a year after a big event, there's 5 to 10 to 15% who may have PTSD. Yeah. Okay. On the other extreme, there's 5 to 10 to 15% who have post-traumatic growth.
Wow, interesting.
All right. So, and no one ever talks about post-traumatic growth. Okay. It does occur at the same. That's what Charles Figley's research has shown. And the bulk of people in the middle will have returned back to normal. Okay, regardless of what the event is. So again, we really live in a society that pathologizes all emotions, and we hear about people talking about resilience, but they're often talking about it like resilience around exams at university, which just, it's part of university life. What we're talking about here is a complete crisis. People are talking, it looks like a war zone, it feels like a war zone. People don't even have the basic necessities of electricity, and people still may not even be physically safe yet for a while. Their property may not be safe for a while. So they're in the thick of it. They are absolutely in a crisis. But what they're saying is, so a year down the track, there's a small subsection of people who will have post-traumatic stress, proper post-traumatic stress disorder, and that doesn't mean they'll have it for life, but a year down the track they have it. There's a sub-portion of people who have post-traumatic growth, and I'm happy to talk about that further if you want to have some questions, and the bulk of people will have recovered. Yeah.
I remember when you came in and came to our symposium, and you shared that the loss of a partner can take 8 years, and I'm not for sure if you said that, but it can take up to 8 years, and that's normal for people to grieve. Yeah. For that
so
time frame.
If it's a significant person, it's a lifetime.
As a lifetime, wow.
It doesn't mean that it impacts you the same as it does in the acute phase of it. Yeah. But it is a lifetime of grief, because at any point, if you say to someone, my sister's been dead, nearly my whole life. If someone said to me tomorrow, you can have your sister back, I'd take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, because it's a loss. It's a grief that's never going. It doesn't mean that every minute of my day is absorbed by that, but it's a profound life event. And I guess if you want to hear more about post-traumatic growth, it's really when you'd say to them, look, if you had the opportunity to have never gone through that experience, people would still be like, yeah, I'd never go through that experience.
Yeah.
But for some people, like say someone's had a heart attack, and then, a year down the track, you look at a population, some people might have PTSD about that. Some people might have post-traumatic growth. And what that is like, you know what? A year ago, I had a heart attack and I was on the treadmill, man. I was just working. And I thought the biggest stress in my life was getting a bigger house, or how can I save for a holiday?
Yeah.
And I had a heart attack and I thought, you know what? Life is limited.
Yeah.
And actually, my marriage is not as bad as I thought it was. My kids are actually pretty great. My career is great, but it's not my whole life. And they change something about themselves.
Yeah, right.
They view life with this whole new awareness about, still wish I'd never had a heart attack, but if I'm going to be here, this is how I'm going to make the most of my life now. And so they actually are happier post the event because of what they've seen. Now, I'm not for 1 second suggesting, wow, there's vets out there who are going to say, so glad that, quarter of the Australia was on fire. But for some people down the track, they might say this was something that, some people go into politics. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to
climate change.
Whatever. And if for me, just as a citizen who's not being directly impacted, one thing that gives me great hope is I am seeing Australia come together as a community more solidly than I ever have experienced in my whole life. Still wish we didn't have to have the bushfire, still wish people didn't have to suffer. But if something good can come out of it, the fact that you guys want a podcast today, it means that we are back in touch with the fact that we are a humanity. We have more in common with each other than we have differences. And that is a positive thing.
I've got to say, I've been just astounded by the support from around the world. It's incredible to see that. And I think it was that photo that was on the front page of the New York Times on New Year's Day of the kangaroo going across the burning building, and all of a sudden the world was like, Australia needs help. And just the the messages and the support, and of course the donations, because let's face it, it's just a huge rebuild that's going to require millions and millions of dollars, and that's what has been pledged. It's just I think I would want people overseas to know how much that's meant to people here, to know that the world's behind us.
And, for some of our vets who are in the thick of it, you're probably not in touch with that. You don't have time to come home and, turn on the news and say, oh, what's happening? Like, how much are people pledging? You're in the thick of it. And to be honest, at this point, if you listen to this podcast while you're in the acute stress, I'd say don't tap into that. Don't come home and look at the news and see what's happened. Don't look at pictures of how bad it is 4 hours away from you, or you are in enough crisis. You don't need to flood yourself with more images and things around that. What I want people to hear is that there are people in every corner of this universe who are thinking of you, who are sending well wishes to you and your community, that people are pledging to do things. Like for myself, I'm thinking in the next 12 months, I'm going to try and visit Kangaroo Island for the first time as a tourist and spend dollars and, contribute something that way. Like people are thinking of you, and what you're doing we think is phenomenal and extraordinary and takes great courage and selflessness. So if you get to listen to the podcast, tap into self-care and know that what you've done today is being appreciated and valued. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm happy to send you the links for all of this, and I'm certainly not comparing this to what happened, but I think, you can have you spoke at the beginning about meeting, talking to someone, an older vet who had a cat that was a stray, that all of a sudden it was that cat that tipped him over the edge and he felt quite emotional about it. You can have an acute grief reaction to things, and then you can have a cumulative reaction, and all of us have the potential to have that cumulative stuff. So even maybe we have vets who are on the fringe who are still receiving animals because they're fair enough, they're not in the actual crisis, their own community is safe. But the cumulative effect of just seeing things over and over and over again, even for an average vet practice, can become, tiring over time. Lots of people talk about burnout. I have quite a strong view on that. I think all of us at any point of our career, it doesn't matter if you're a hairdresser or whatever, can feel burnt out, like just I'm so sick of this job, I should have done something else, and everybody else's job looks better. The florist, the postman, I should have. It doesn't matter what your career is, but I think when you work in critical care, whether you're a vet or a nurse or a doctor in an ambulance or police or, in the defence forces, it's on a whole different scale again. But I think, all of us at any time can suffer this cumulatively overwhelming, and it can sneak up on you, and one day it's just almost crippling. It's got a term, it's called compassion fatigue, where it's just like, I cannot give one more thing to one more person. That is recoverable. All of us will have, I say you should expect compassion fatigue. One of the things I'm curious that may happen to the vets, that certainly happens to us when we've, been impacted by a big event, is that everybody else annoys you by their trivialities.
Yeah.
Like, are you like, oh, are you serious? Like that, you're guinea pig, got nausea, can you see what's going on in this? Like where you almost just, you're tired of giving to people continually, but also people whinging about things that just now seem completely pointless to you. You have a very low threshold for that. And it's it's kind of an indicator for us for our mental health about how, like, man, I need a holiday, or I actually need a weekend off, or I need to not be giving. And what happens is you probably went into vet science because you're a bit of a nurturing person.
Yeah.
And you'd be like us. You go to dinner parties and people are like, what do you do? I'm a vet. My budgie is just not quite
himself.
Yeah. For me, everybody wants to tell me, my kids think that I've got this like sixth sense, like, we're the fourth person in the checkout at the grocery store or at the supermarket, and we get there and I go, how's your day? And the girl starts crying, like I'm writing, referrals and things. I have a big empathy radar, obviously, but, all of us get tired of it. We're like, oh, give it a rest, man. Like I don't have to care about your pet every single waking moment of my life. So there's that sort of cumulative compassion fatigue side of it that people may have already been suffering before this happened that can make you quite jaded. Yeah. So just, check in when people get a bit of come up for air, check in with yourself. Like, how were you before this?
Yeah.
And what has this crisis now made you feel like?
Yeah.
So have you got resources for that? Because that's people listening to this are going to go, yeah, that's me. That's what I feel like all the time. What can I do about it?
Well, you might have to ask me back. We might have to have a list on that.
I'd love to have you back.
But I guess the other thing that I thought that I will send you the resources is it's 12 months ago exactly. So I obviously am involved in a child's death every few days at work, and then you have those weeks where you have several deaths over a couple of days, and then you have a couple of weeks break, and then it, so again, I'm not comparing myself to what's going on with the bushfires, but I know what it's like to be in a heightened kind of state and responding and giving all the time. And then something happened to me 12 months ago, unprecedented, will never happen to me again in my career. And it floored me to the point that I thought, yeah, I think I'm done. I just don't think I can do this work anymore. But what people do in that crisis is they either run or they get busy. Like, oh my God, I'm not coping. I can't let anyone know that. So I made sure that all my committee stuff was up to date, and I
signed up to new PhD.
Yeah, exactly. I better do some more podcasting, trying to cover it. And I was in such a profoundly dark place over that event. Like, what could I have done to change things? How could I have influenced this? And intellectually, was beyond my control, had nothing to do with me. Emotionally, it was like, I'm a bad person. If and you visualize, like some of these vets might be doing, you visualize about, if I'd gotten up an hour earlier, could I have done this? Could I have, if I'd worked 2 hours later, could I have saved 7 more koalas? Where you're in a crisis and you're unable to kind of think rationally about things. So I have 2 blogs about that. One's called Wellbeing for the Broken, because I think we talk about self-care in this whole, like, you know, how do you every day look after yourself? But this is like, what do you do when you're actually broken, when you feel completely trashed, where you feel like there is nothing in the tank?
Except nothing left to give.
Nothing left to give, that, you know, it is an existential crisis, because for most of us, being a vet for these guys, you know, women and men, would be a big part of who they are in this community, their identity. So in this crisis, you start to think, I don't think I can be a vet anymore. Who am I? My life is going to have no purpose, no meaning. I've got no way to feed, you know, my family. I can't pay the house mortgage anymore. You know, like, you get in this crisis. So I've done 2 blogs about that. First one is like, how bad does it look? And for those of you who are in a dark place, don't read the first one now. It may not be helpful. If you want to read it to know, can you be in that dark place and survive? Read it then. But you know, like, I talked about not being able to sleep and being panic stricken about being not able to sleep, and then thinking, God, you know, I've got to go into the intensive care tomorrow and work, and I'm not going to be good at it. And then you start to think of every failure you've ever had in your life. Like, why did my marriage break down? And I described it at picking at every psychological wound I'd ever had. It was like nail under the scab, pick, you know. So the first blog is about, like, how dark can it get and what does it look like? And the second blog is about how do you recover? And for me, routine was everything. So I'm a bit of an obsessive person anyway, but it didn't matter what time I actually fell asleep, whether it was 10 to 4, you know, 5 past 2 in the morning, 5 to 5 a.m., the alarm went off, and I forced myself to get up and go to the gym. I made decisions about meals on a Sunday, and I stuck to it because my brain was too fatigued to decide what to feed my kids. I needed a routine, and I needed a framework to just survive. And for the vets who may be feeling like that, have a routine. Doesn't matter what's going on. So you're going to get up, and you may not be able to go for a walk. You know, your gym may not exist anymore. Do some push-ups, do some sit-ups. If you've never done that, don't do it, because it's going to be, you're going to damage your body in a different way. But like, routine. I'm going to get up, and I'm going to have a shower, and I'm going to eat my breakfast, and I'm going to take 15 minutes, and I'm going to read a fictional book as a means of escapism, and then I'm going to face the day. But it's like, otherwise you wake up in the morning and you think, I'm still in this terrible place. I'm still in this dark place, and I can't make a decision. Like, do I go to work today? Should I stay home? Do I exercise? Do I not exercise? You know, should I be on a paleo diet today? Like, would that be helping? You know, like, we're trying to make too many decisions. Take as much of that out of the equation as you can. You are in a complete crisis. You know, look after yourself. Take the decisions out, and just be as gentle as you possibly can. Be a friend to yourself during this time. Don't be your world's biggest critic. You have to nurture. And even if you have an internal voice saying you haven't done the right thing, or you could have done more, you need to say, hey, how would I treat a friend who is saying this? You know, stop that voice inside your brain from being so critical. Just slow everything down. And then, you know, how do you recover? And for me, it's been a 12 months, you know, for the first time in my life, I went to a counsellor to work through that. And, you know, I found all this cumulative grief over the course of my career that I'd obviously tucked away, or grief about, you know, failed relationships or fights you've had with your kids. It all came up, and, you know, I kept working. I didn't leave the job. I still loved it. I'm about to finish my PhD. You can come around the other side of that. And, you know, we talk so much about not being able to cope, and burnout and depression and anxiety, and all those things happen. But actually, on the whole, people are ridiculously resilient. You know, you go into our children's hospital, you go into an adult hospital, you go into a war zone, people still fall in love. People still worry about their body. People still eat. People still engage in life. People still find a way. And so we have to believe in that part of our human spirit that just goes on. And, you know, if that wasn't true, the world would have ended 100 times over. You know, and we can get very fixated. But in actual fact, as weird as it sounds, this is the most peaceful time the world has ever seen. We've never known peace on a world scale, despite what's going on in Iran and everything. We've never known peace on a world scale like we are now. We've lost sight of that. You know, the whole world is trying to fund Australia. We have Canadians and Americans flying in to fight bushfires.
Yeah.
We have vets from around the world offering to come and help. You know, there is so much more that connects us than, you know, separates us. And, you know, again, I say out of this tragedy, we need to remind ourselves of that, and not in a platitude, Pollyanna, like, aren't we lucky that we have these bushfires that are away? But just, you know, it's easy to look at the despair, but hear our voices. People genuinely care. We're genuinely reaching out. We have no other capacity on a Sunday morning in Brisbane when we are not in the fires to do anything but, you know, give money and give, you know, our time and our energy to say, people actually are caring about you. We're respecting you. We value what you do. And in 3, 6, 12 months' time, we're still going to be interested, and we're making that commitment.
Yeah.
I think we've got to stop. I could listen to you all day, but I think that's a great place to wrap it up. I have witnesses to you saying that you're going to come back on the podcast because we have more to talk about. But for this one, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Really
I'm
good.
sick of the sound of my own voice. I'm glad I stopped.
That was really, and I just think I just like to say that, you know, a lot of the things you touched on, then obviously the reason why we talk about this today is the bushfires, but there's just a lot of themes there that would apply to vets and the importance of self-care and the things that they go through just in the course of being a veterinarian. That I think are great lessons for people to take away wherever they're a vet in the world.
Absolutely.
So
and we don't, this is where, you know, like, vets have never been exposed to this level of trauma, bushfires or elsewhere. Like, lots of animals died at home or died on this, you know, on the road, where everyone stood around and thought, wow, that was a bad accident for that dog. Nothing's going to happen. You know, like, it's different. Like, it's like exactly like us. We are having to see more children with these life-limiting conditions. Like, it's a changing world. And so we have to change. And part of that, you know, people talk about these are the soft skills. That's crap. Anyone can learn. Most people can learn technical skills. Like, the other day, you know, I was doing a podcast and someone said, you can teach a monkey how to use a ventilator. But it's the human skills. It's the human emotions. That's the tough stuff. That's the really tough stuff. And I think, you know, we talk about expectations, like, you know, society expects it of us now, like, to extreme levels. And it's the stuff that actually can break you. It's the technical stuff, not so much. It's the emotional stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
I still struggle with ventilators. Now I feel I feel less than a monkey.
Just to reassure you, I've never seen a monkey work a ventilator.
I'll throw my end with a joke there.
All right, let's call it a day. Thank you so much.
That was awesome.
Sunday. Thanks everybody else, and I can't wait to get this out there. I think it's going to be very valuable. Thank you again for listening. We hope you found value in that. And if you did, I'm going to ask you again, please share it with anybody who you think could benefit from listening to this episode.
For those of you who are out there who want to help out and want to contribute, there is a community of people who still need our support. And that community is your fellow veterinarians. In the areas in Australia which are affected by the fires, veterinarians are there treating wildlife, treating domestic pets, even treating and taking care of livestock. And these veterinarians have themselves also either lost a clinic, lost their homes, may have lost loved ones, or have actually lost the community that is supporting their business. If you want to support those veterinarians on the ground in these areas, then I urge you to donate towards the AVA Benevolent Fund, the Australian Veterinary Association Benevolent Fund. You can find it on www.ava.com.au/donate.